Hey guys, Glyeth here, back with another build video on Urgot. Today I'm going to go over the tank build on Urgot that I've been really liking. And before I get into the build real quick, I just want to say that I'm personally not building Gore Drinker anymore. A lot of people have been asking me about that. It's been nerfed 2 patches in a row. I just don't really think it's worth it anymore. I've been having way more success with other builds right now, so... With that being said, let's get into the tank build. Alright, first item is pretty much always going to be Titanic Hydra with this build. This item just gives you a ton of HP, a decent amount of damage, and the damage is also going to go up the more HP you get, which is really nice with this build. And the more HP that we get, the slow field on the Frostfire is also going to go up, so you really just want to stack HP with this build. And another nice thing about Titanic is that if you build it before your cleaver, or if you build even Time Mat before cleaver, it's going to double stack your cleaver. It's going to count as like a separate proc for your cleaver, so you're going to stack it literally twice as fast, which is very nice. Another thing is you can take jungle camps really fast. It helps with your wave clear, so those are definitely things to keep in mind. Regarding the wave clear, you do want to be kind of careful in some lanes. I'll sometimes not build Time Mat, and I'll just go pickaxe into ruby crystals. And that's if I just don't want to push the lane. Sometimes you do want to push the lane if you just don't want to interact with the lane. And in that case, you can build the Time Mat, but yeah, definitely something to keep in mind there. But overall, this item just feels really solid, feels really consistent rushing as a first item, and just really fits the build. Second item is going to be upgrading your boots. Sometimes I do this before I finish my Titanic Hydra even. It just depends on the lane. You should always get normal boots while you're building into Titanic Hydra, but definitely after you finish Titanic Hydra, you should upgrade your boots before you buy your next core item. So boot options for me are usually plated steel caps or mercury treads. And the way that I decide pretty much is if they have a lot of physical damage and auto attack champions, then I'll go plated steel caps. And if they have a lot of magic damage and CC, then I go for merc treads. Also, another thing to keep in mind is that merc treads don't help for knockups. Third item is actually going to change depending on the game, but it's going to be Black Cleaver or Frostfire Gauntlet, and whichever one you don't build third, I would build as a fourth item. And a few things that I consider when I'm thinking about which one to pick to build third. I would say most games I do choose Frostfire Gauntlet just because it's much cheaper, and I just think the item is super cost effective. But if you're really fed and you just want to go damage and you want the shred, I think Cleaver's fine. If your team is like heavy AD and you really benefit from that cleaver shred, that can be another thing to consider. If the team has multiple tanks on their team, then you might want to go cleaver third instead. But other than that, I usually go Frostfire. If my carries are doing well and I just need to be frontline and I trust them, then Frostfire is really good. Like I said, it's only 2,800 gold. You're getting a ton of HP. You're getting both resists, a little bit of CDR, the Sunfire Burn, the Frost Field. You're getting just so much from the item for 2,800 gold that it's too cost effective. So I think it's a really good third item. Fifth item is going to be Sterak's Gauge, and this item did just get nerfed, but I think it still feels really good in this build, especially as a fifth item, because both the Bloodlust passive and the Lifeline passive both scale off your max HP. And you're gonna be in the fight, like you're gonna be in the front line in fights with this build. So you're going to get a lot of stacks of that Bloodlust. Every time you deal damage to an enemy champion or take damage from an enemy champion, you're going to get a stack of the Bloodlust. And that can stack up to 5 times, and it's going to heal you based off your max health, which you have a lot with this build. So the healing is crazy on it. The shield is not as crazy, but it's still nice, especially if you pair it with the gargoyles. You can definitely do some clutch baits there. But yeah, plus 50 attack damage, 400 health. It's good stats, and honestly, the Bloodlust passive is super clutch in team fights for me. Sixth and final item with this build is going to be Gargoyle Stoneplate, and this feels really good as the last item because the shield, which is the active on this item, scales off your bonus HP, and you're going to have a lot of bonus HP at this point in the game. You should have over 4k. So the shield is literally going to be like 2000 HP shield. And the other passive on this item, which is called Fortify, synergizes really nice with Sterak's because it stacks up to 5 times. So every time you take damage, you're going to get a stack, just like Sterak's Gauge. So you're going to be in there just tanking in the team fights with this build, just absorbing a ton of damage. And you're going to just pop that shield and just tank everyone. And it also gives you 60 armor and MR, as well as 15 ability haste. And the resists are really nice at this point, because you're only getting resist from the Frostfire Gauntlet and conditioning if you take that. So it just kind of rounds off the build, gives you what you need, and the shield is super clutch for team fighting. Always make sure you try to use that active. You definitely don't want to forget that one, because yeah, like I said, it's literally like 2000 HP. It's just too clutch. Runes for the tank build are going to be Precision Tree Primary, and you're going to want to run Press Attack. Press Attack just increases your damage, and it's really easy to proc because you can proc it with your W with Urgot. Just very, very consistent rune. Always has good numbers for me. Next rune is going to be Triumph. Heals 12% of your missing health on takedowns, so kills and assists. And also gives you a little bit of bonus gold too, but really nice because you're stacking so much HP with this build. And just a super clutch rune. It's saved me so many times. It's allowed me to win 2v2s, and it's really nice in team fights with this build. I've actually healed like 7k with this rune before with this build. So really clutch rune. Next rune is going to be Legend Tenacity, and I would say like 90% of the time you're going to want to take this because most teams have a lot of CC these days. If they don't have any CC, you can opt for the Legend Bloodline, but I do think that's pretty rare in most games. Most games you're going to want Legend Tenacity. Next rune is Last Stand. I honestly just think this is the best rune in this row. The other two, you can't really go cut down because you're stacking a lot of HP. You're going to have more HP than most other champions. And Coop just it doesn't have good numbers whenever I run it, so you can run it, but I wouldn't do it unless if you're against someone with an execute like Garen, Darius, Cho'Gath, I think you can run it, but other than that, just go Last Stand. Next page is going to be Resolve, and you're going to want to go for... Honestly, this is kind of a toss-up. Conditioning, Second Wind, Bone Plating, they're all three pretty good. I actually do really like conditioning with this build, since you're just going for like this ultra late game scaling tank. So if you can get away with conditioning, it's really good in this build. If you're against heavy poke, then you should go Second Wind. And if you're against an all-in champion like Riven, Jax, Renekton, something that can all-in you with quick combos, then you should go Bone Plating. Especially if they don't have a good way to proc off your Bone Plating like Riven. Like, she has to actually go on you to proc your Bone Plating. So that can be really nice. Next rune is going to be Overgrowth. I think this is kind of a must with this build because you're just stacking so much HP. This is just going to give you more HP. Overall, super solid rune. I think if they have a ton of CC, you can go Unflinching. I actually think Unflinching is kind of an underrated rune, actually, but most games I would say you're going Overgrowth. And then adaptive runes are going to be double adaptive force is what I usually go for. And then I take armor rune if I'm versus AD lane. If I'm versus AP, then I'll go for the magic resist rune. Unless it's an AP champion like Kennen where they're still auto attacking you a lot, then I'll still go for armor. Because you have to factor in minion damage as well. And then also if they have like an AD jungle. Another rune page I've been testing out with this build is Conquer. If you guys do run this, then just keep the page the same as the PTA page, but just swap out PTA for Conquer. And it seemed pretty good so far, actually. I do kind of like it with this build, especially if you're up against a lot of like tanks or a lot of healing. I've also been liking the Wukong matchup because you can stack it on his clone. And the annoying thing about Wukong is you can't really fight him that much early. But also, sometimes you accidentally proc your PTA on his clone. It's just kind of annoying. So any matchups where I'm not really trying to fight the guy early, or they just have a lot of tanks and healing, I think it's pretty good. It also gives you a little bit of healing, which is something that's really lacking in this build. But you just get a lot of extra damage because you're able to live so long because you're just so tanky. And yeah, it seemed pretty good so far. You guys can test it out if the game looks good for it. I definitely recommend going PTA. Like I'd probably say I still go like 80% of my games, especially if you're in a matchup where you can fight like levels 1 to 3. I think PTA is still amazing. But if you're in a really hard matchup like Wukong, Atrox, I've been testing it out in, You can definitely give it a shot and see how it goes. That's going to do it for the build though, guys. I just want to give my final thoughts on this build, what I think is good, what I think is bad. Overall, it's been the most consistent build for me this season for sure. And even though I called it a tank build, you have so much damage still. I do more damage with this build than I do with my other builds, with any other build that I've tried pretty much. You just have so much extended damage, and you're actually able to survive in team fights, which is also really good for getting fears off too, which is another thing I love about this build. You don't have to worry too much about like dying mid-fear because you're just so tanky. And also if your carries are doing good, it's super good because you can just frontline for them and just peel for them, and you're just so tanky. And you also have increased size from the Frostfire, so you can like block skill shots for them too. The one con with the build that I will say is that you don't have too much sustain. And that can be an issue when you're split pushing, especially if the other guy has sustain. Your split push is still good, but you just can't go, like you can't trade and then like heal up on a wave and then trade. You kind of have to just like all in and hope you can kill the guy. But that's really the only con that I found with the build, and everything else is good. Amazing team fight build. If you do this build, definitely try to go for the team fights more. But yeah, really consistent for me this season, so I'm really liking it. Alright guys, that is going to do it for this build video, but if you did enjoy this video, feel free to drop me a like. Helps the video do a little bit better. You can also drop a sub if you want. You can also catch me live at twitch.tv/GoliathGames. Can drop me a follow over there. You can always ask me questions. I always try to answer, at least if I'm in queue. Sometimes if I'm in game, it's a little bit harder, but if I'm ever in queue, I'm always down to answer questions. And you can also drop a sub over there if you have Amazon Prime or Twitch Prime. You can drop a sub for free. Really helps me out. I know some of you guys from YouTube do that, and I really appreciate it, because it really does allow me to put more time into content creation, which is what I'm really passionate about. So with that being said, guys, I hope you have a good day. Thank you all for watching, and stay safe, guys. Take care.